Hi,
Hi,
George.
George.
Hi,
Ooh,
George.
thank you. Yeah, we can hear you. All right. Thank you very much for joining us for this seminar. And I would like to invite Xavier Kigosi to introduce our speaker today. Xavier, floor is yours.
Okay.
Karim.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm interested to introduce Michiel. Michiel, he's an assistant professor from Leiden University at the Institute of Environmental Science in Netherlands. Michiel obtained his BSc and MSc in evolutionary biology from Groningen University, same country, Netherlands. And he was awarded his PhD from South Africa, from Groningen University, but his study area was in South Africa. And he focused in ecology autocatalyst. I think he will mention a bit what is autocatalyst in terms of ecology in African savannas, especially on nutrients, the distribution, and ecosystem stabilities. He's more interested in effects of human and wildlife and vice versa, and drivers of ecosystem stability, niche partitioning on large herbivores on the side of climate change. Michiel has been researching in Tanzania for a couple of years, almost 9 years. He has been giving his research experience, especially in Serengeti ecosystem. He started under Bioservices project that aimed to quantify how regional gradients in landfill and soil fertility drive variation in ecosystem organization and how these affect human population growth and associated land use changes. Michiel has investigated on squeezing, the consequence of squeezing ecosystem stability inside and outside protected areas, and the spatial interaction between landscapes in Serengeti ecosystems. And I think more comes from his side about researches. And if you don't know, Michiel is among my daily PhD supervisors. So I'm glad to have him as my supervisor. And also, there's new PhD candidate for him to supervise, Matama Ivy. So we are glad to have you as our supervisor. Please, Michiel, the floor is yours. You may give us what you have. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll be talking about human-wildlife coexistence. So I've been trained as an ecologist, very much actually. I've worked in South Africa in Scroobian Blows Park, and I didn't like any people. People make things complicated, I always thought. But now, since I've worked here in the African Bioservices program, actually my work started more and more focus on what happens outside the protected areas and how these two things interact. So I have a Okay, so I have a lab together with Emily Schwenk, who is another supervisor of the other supervisor of Xavier. She has worked on invasive plants mostly, also in South Africa, did her PhD there, but also now works mostly in East Africa. Both cover now the southern area of Kenya, specifically Kajiado, but also here the northwest area of Tanzania. We still have a project going on in South Africa as well. We really like to compare these three countries because they do things very differently. And that sometimes it's very eye-opening on how things could help the other countries, but also how things should be approached, right? We both come from a bit of a fundamental ecology background. So she works in invasive species, I work more on ecosystem dynamics, large mammals. But over time, we now started moving into a more like applied science, and we try to combine these two things because we really are convinced that that will bring science forward and also help to solve or mitigate the issues we're facing. These are the three pillars we have. So the healthy landscapes is really about restoring degraded landscapes, and we see that a lot around this area, right? We'll be familiar with these kind of things. It's a lot about invasive species. How can we get rid of them? How can we restore healthy grazing lands? We focus on human-wildlife conflict. That's where I come in with the larger mammal things. And we really want this to increase mobility both ways. So we used to send a lot of new-stage students here, and we're now trying to get more and more Tanzanian or Kenyan South African students to the Netherlands as well. So Xavier is an example, and now Matana is following him up or joining him. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Which is not always easy because it requires a lot of funds, but we're going to try to get that experience because I think it's really useful. Okay, so I want to zoom out a little bit. So this is what they call donut theory from Ray Kurzweil. It's about social and planetary boundaries. So this is what they call an ecological ceiling. Basically, many of these aspects we are overshooting them, right? In terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of climate change, in terms of pollution. And the idea is that we have to try and stay within this ceiling, right? We have to reduce our pollution, we have to increase our biodiversity and different. But at the same time, there's also what they call the social foundation. So it shouldn't come at the cost of things like poverty, health, food security, those kind of things. Poverty. So we have this like donut, basically donut shape, this ring where you want to go, right? So we want to have people have good lives, but at the same time we want to have a sustainable future. And the UN adopted these 17 goals to work towards that. I hope most of you will be familiar with them, but it covers like most of these aspects, right? Equality, poverty, food security, and biodiversity there as well. Both goal 14 and 15. And I think actually they are very much connected with each of the other ones, and not necessarily in a trade-off. That's what's being presented, but I believe that biodiversity is the basis, basically, for all these other goals to meet them, to reach those. And the reason for that is that biodiversity or ecosystems are actually very sustainable by themselves, right? So ecosystems are self-sustaining systems. So the more biodiversity system is, the more recycling is happening, the more closed loop you get. So basically, if you manage to get like a biodiverse system, then it can go on forever, as it always has been. And then the challenge there is, of course, that we incorporate that into our systems these days, including food productivity, food security. The other thing is that biodiversity increases our ecosystem services, things like pollination, primary, clean water, all the things that we highly depend on, and especially here in Tanzania, I think where many people are dependent on that direct surroundings. Biodiversity is a big win. The third one is the increased stability. That's another thing we're facing in, especially in these regions, but actually all across the world, is extreme weather events, so more droughts, more floods. Biodiversity actually creates this stability of system. But these are the three reasons why I think biodiversity is something we have to start with. It's the basis of trying to accomplish all of it. And that brings me to what is then the problem? Well, biodiversity is going down worldwide, and actually Tanzania is doing quite a good job compared to where I'm from. I'm from the Netherlands. We are like the worst on the list, I think. But the challenge now is to bend that curve, right? And that's basically what we're all working on. Many of the conservation scientists are working to bend this curve of biodiversity loss. And the idea is that if we manage to change our food production system, change our consumption, and do more conservation aspects, we might actually be able to do it. Okay. Tanzania, as I said, Tanzania is doing a good job. So about 48% of Tanzania is protected in some way. And that includes both the game reserves, but also national parks. And that is you're like the world leader almost, right? I haven't looked at the list, but this is high up. Most countries are struggling to meet the 30 by 30 rules that we have agreed on in the CPP. In the Netherlands, we have about 26%, and then that 26 is in really bad shape. So just as comparison, how we are doing. And you guys, Kenya has 11%. I know Tanzanians always like to be better than Kenyans, so I thought to present this picture. And the good thing, I really love this. So this is something that has been here for a long time. The whole design about your national parks, where the cities are, and these soft lines. So this used to be the case over the past centuries. So what we basically have, we have these very dense populated cities, right? There's a lot of human impact. It's very different than the natural environment. Then we have these national parks, right? All the way to the other end, where you have that high biodiversity, low human. But the cool thing is that you guys have this gradient that goes in there. If you come to the Netherlands, it's very different. Like you have a city, you have a farm, you have a nature reserve. It's like hard boundaries everywhere. And we have like every square meter in the Netherlands has been assigned a certain thing. This way your nature, this way your food, this way your. But it's under threat. It's changing now, right? So this is work we have been doing during my postdoc. This analysis actually of INS does. So we look at agricultural conversion over time from the 80s till 2018. I hope you can see it in different colors. But the orange stuff used to be agriculture already regulated. The green stuff is all like forest savanna in the middle. And the important bits are the red stuff. So the red stuff has been converted into agriculture in the past, 4 decades, right? And if you look at the spatial patterns, like most of it is like on the edges of the protected areas. So those used to be relatively savanna-like areas, soft boundaries, what we call it, that they're now converted into cropland. And that's what you see, right? If you drive outside here in Grumeti, but also here in the Masra region, it's like the maize field started right where you exit the protected areas. The other side is the NCA and the Odiondo is actually doing much better in that sense. So it's much more savanna-like, it's pastoral livelihoods, and you don't see those conversions. Although they do happen, it's much less than 30%. You see major increases in livestock. So this is on the Kenyan side, this is Mara, the data from the Mara from Joseph Ogutu, collaborator with the Livestock Project. And this is, I'm not sure, but it's the entire Kenya or just the Mara region. But what you see is major increases in cattle, major increases in shows, and that comes at the cost of wildfires. This works. Okay, so this is work that I did during my postdoc. Actually, looked at satellite pictures and start to identify what we call livestock paths or livestock highways. So we zoom in now to the border of Masra. You all know this system, I guess. And we zoom into the border of Masra. So this is the protected area, game reserve, this area, the boundary village lands. And this is what you basically observe. The bomas are right outside, and you see these tracks of livestock that move to the park on a daily basis. So what they do is send their livestock in the morning, and then the livestock comes back in the afternoon, and even like without herding. So that just livestock goes in and out by themselves. I've mapped all of these. That was a fun time. You see that like along the boundary of Masra, you see all the way also Serengeti, western boundary. You see that these livestock paths are going in. Prevention in Congo much less so. You know that, right? So there's much better protection at this side against these things than in many other parts. Oh, sorry. What you can do, so these are the livestock paths. You can overlay them with fire maps. So these are remote sensing, MODIS fire maps. What you then can do is zoom in into these areas. You see that like this boundary areas, it doesn't burn any. Red means it has burned until like 2016, which was the time, the latest year I studied it. The areas that are green burned the last time in like 2001. The yellow is about in the middle, so 2008. So you see this, what we call compression, right? So the area burned gets smaller and smaller. That's what we call that Serengeti squeeze at some point. But then the result is the result of this illegal grazing events that happened in Masra. It started around 2008, 2009, somewhere there. We know there was a major drought in the years. But the thing is that drought has initiated this illegal grazing, and they've just kept doing it ever since. And if you go to the area, there's a lot of bush encroachment actually because of the livestock grazing and a reduction in fires that has quite some ecosystem consequences. At the other side, you see the same thing. So this is the boundary with Lodiondo, and the blue ones are all the bomas. So map them using satellite imagery. The other half of my place. And what you see there is that many of these bomas actually go inside the protected area. So what they do is they move in like multi-day trips inside the Serengeti. This area is really hard to reach, especially in the wet season. There's no ranger post here. Actually, they built one after this paper. but there was hardly any effective measurement or enforcement at this site. So they go on multi-day trips, they build bombers inside and then they go out. And that also has implications for the fire maps that we want. And that is not just here again. You see it everywhere across Tanzania. So this is the fire maps from the entire country. The black polygons are all the protected areas. So you see that basically everything that burns in Tanzania is protected area. And outside protected area, there's no fire. Right? And that's agricultural conversion, that's livestock grazing, that's basically nothing to burn. And that means that actually that soft boundary that we had is now transitioning into a hard boundary, right? So here basically what happens is that the human impact is increasing, especially around the protected areas that used to be have low impact. And biodiversity is generally decreasing. And the response to that by the government, is to actually do the that's a very intuitive response to say like that happens outside. What we're going to do is upgrade protected area status here. So they did that in multiple occasions. So we have now a Pololeti game reserve that's been established a couple of years back. We have now Speed Gulf. People are moving out now between now and December. We're talking about NCA, right? There's a lot happening there. So this is basically the response to what happens outside. But the final result is that the boundary becomes even harder. Right? It's both inside and outside. It's a hard boundary. It's upgrading protected area status. This is what it looks like. So you basically have your savanna and blue, you run into a maize field. You can imagine this has major consequences, right? Because if you're an elephant, you live in this area, then it's a nice snack outside there, right? Mm-hmm. And that is exactly what's happening. So we have data from the ministry. So there is this consolidation scheme since 2015. I think the data at least starts in 2015. So they get all the reports from incidences across the entire country. It goes via the districts to the ministry. And the idea is that people get consolidated. There isn't enough money, so in practice it's less effective than it should be maybe. But at least there is data like to look at these trends in time. What we see is that elephant is by far, like in terms of crop damage, it's elephants, right? 99% of the things that. So that's problem animal number one if you talk about agriculture. And it seems to increase over time. There is a bias in this data because the scheme started at here, so people had to get used to it. So you expect a little bit of an increasing trend. But I've been going to Waso, Mugumu, Bunda over the past couple of days with Matana. Everyone says like it's increasing. Elephants is getting more problematic almost by the month. Right? And I think many of you know how the situation is here in the Serengeti and Bunda district. So it's really getting extreme. Okay. Then livestock depredation. The main animal is actually hyena. People focus on lions, we do that too, but actually hyena is the most problematic in terms of livestock depredation. And also those are. And then fatalities, human fatalities. People often say it's hippo, right? That kills most people. Other people say it's elephant. We find in this database at least it's mamba. There is biases here. So some of the reports, some of the people dying, for instance, from livestock or from lions are not reported. It's part of the Maasai tribal. There's a name for it. They start hunting lions and then they get killed. So they don't report it because they don't want the ministry to know it. So there is bias here, but I think even if you would reduce those biases, then still crocodiles would pop up high on the list. And if you talk to Tara in Bunda, but also the Bunda district game officer, they say that to the whole Lake district, there's a lot of incidents with crocodiles. Okay, and then I want to show this because there's hardly anyone working on crocodiles. If you go to the Serengeti meeting last December, I don't think there was any talk. So maybe one. And then if you look at lions, hyenas, elephants, like it's the whole conference is filled. So what happens is that you basically increase your conservation efforts at these bordering areas, but it also means that you have increased populations of problem animals, so to say. And I think Ukraine has experienced it as well. So the number of lions have gone up, the number of elephants gone up. That causes then problems in the village lands. Right? But it's not just animals. We also have conflict with plants. That's where Emily and I meet, right? I do the animals, she does the plants. So this is Puntia, you know it very well in this area. If you drive towards the west, it's full of these like big populations, which from where was it in February last year. We have Ipomea, this is Gloriondo, it's popping up in the whole Stocknot area. You see it popping up in the landscape. We have Lantana camara, it's forming these thickets also here outside the protected areas. Really dense thickets, right? It is Acacia Drepanodonium in many of the grazed area. I think the Makundusi village grazing lands, right? It's full of Acacia Drepanodonium. It's popping up. And this is footage from Loriondo, so you see it in multiple places. We have water hyacinth. This is in the lake shore. Lake Victoria is a huge problem, especially because crocs like to hide in here. Prosopis, I'm not sure whether people are familiar with that, but it's a big problem in Kenya, Ethiopia, more towards the Horn of Africa. But I've heard that also in the Moshi area, it's now popping up and becoming problematic. It's a species from South America. It's very acacia-like. FAO introduced it in the 80s. People were really happy with it because it was green, right? And you had shade. And now, so I have students actually working there, and you see that it's taking over the landscape. It's just evading much monocultures. Like this is all Prosopis, what you see. And that has major impacts again, and I'll come back to that later on. So, and these invasive plants are not just outside. That's where it mostly starts, but can they come inside? Right? So you actually have a whole team that is working on invasive species on a daily basis. So this is what we looked at last year. This is one of the Punja clearing plots. So they spent like a lot of work to get these Punja out, and they spray them with chemicals just to get rid of it. This is basically keep doing it, see what you can get rid of. And then if you drive outside, then it's full of Punja. It's full of lantana. So it's like you try to get rid of it, but if your source is not being removed, then yeah, it's a never-ending story. Okay, so what can we do about it? Oh, sorry, this is how it links together. Maybe this is nice. Maybe you've seen it before.
Kweli kabisa inasumbua. Juzi kati hapa hata sisi walikuwa wameingia hapa. Hapa yakiwa malezi sisi wanalala huko. Yaani nakuwa ni shida, wanyama wanahangaika, yaani usiku kucha hatulali.
Jamba. Wallahi. Mlema. Mara mbili. Torongo. Kwa ajili naitwa Benson Masengwa. Kazi kuu ninayoifanya hapa nchini na ufugaji. Pili hali hapo kuna nyasi za kutosha za mifugo. Kilimo kilikuwa kinatoa mazao ya kutosha, lakini kwa miaka hii ukatutiza. Kwa mfano kama ng'ombe, kipindi hii ilikuwa ina ng'ombe zangu zilikuwa zina afya nzuri. Baada ya muda ng'ombe zikashuka tu kiasi, atashuka kifanini. Baadaye kwa daktari alinunua dawa za mifugo ya tibu ng'ombe zikabadilika. Karibu kufuatilia wataalamu suala vipi bwana, kwa chakula hatuishi kama zamani. Ng'ombe kwenda zinakwenda kwa sababu gani? Hiyo hii sababu ilikuwa ngumu sana. Jinsi tena maisha kuta ile tena ya malisho ule nyasi na wale mimea mingi sana bila gani.
So for those of you that don't speak Swahili, what he's basically saying is how these invasive species affect their livelihoods, their livestock, but also conflict with animals. And hyena, for instance, is actually hiding behind these like bush encroachers. In this case, it's invasive plants. It could also be native species. I like this because it really visualizes the whole thing, right? And especially in the Netherlands, people have no idea what's happening here, and can show them graphs and whatever, but it doesn't land. These kind of videos this one's made by Africa School of Storytelling really help. So this is what happens not just there. So we talked to the Serengeti district in Mugumu. They say that's what's happening. So there's actually one of the prides now, called by FZS, is actually living in the village lands of Mugumu. So they only spend time outside, and that's most likely related to the increased bush encroachment. So that basically hiding places there in the area. We see it in Cagado as well, in Prosopis. So we've just documented that with with students that most of the attacks by lions, most human wildlife conflict happens in areas that have dense prosopis cover. And that is the same thing. These animals hide in there, goats run in there, and then they get eaten. Or people, so this is actually a school, a path with their schools, they keep children walk to school and they're suddenly out. So it really increases the human wildlife conflict. That's how these invasive species, invasive plants and animals interact with each other. So they interact. So how to go about this? That's the big question, right? And that's what we try to work on. And I think many of the people here are also working on it. So that's really something I want to discuss this afternoon as well, how to move forward. So I want to explain a little, an example of something that has been done in South Africa that has been really successful. It's called the Working for Water. So water security, clean water especially, is a really big problem in South Africa. And what they wanted to do is set up a program, not just to increase the amount of water, but have like a holistic approach, trying to tackle multiple problems at once. So they had multiple objectives. So it's one, enhance water security. It is to protect and restore biodiversity. It was to restore healthy landscapes, reduce poverty, and increase equality, so reduce inequality. So these are quite some objectives, right? So what they did, so many of the problem with the water quality is that invasive plants, aquatic plants, you actually have it here at the dam as well, right? If you look at Lake Victoria, it's like covered in water hyacinth. That's one of the things they have in South Africa as well. So they dam a lot to keep the water in, but then like there's accumulating so much nutrients that actually all these aquatic plants, they cover the entire lake. And that kills everything that's in the lake because it's blocking sunlight, and then you get like less oxygen, low water, fish die, etc., etc. So what they want to do is remove these invasive species, then restore the water quality. They do that by using biocontrol. And what they do is they look for people that are like marginalized, so handicapped people, people from minority groups, basically. And they let them mass rear insects. So these insects attack those aquatic plants, but you need to have a lot of them, right? So they give them a little job. They provide money, they mass rear it, and then it becomes their project. They get ownership, and it is a huge success. So it has cleaned, has increased, it has reduced the amount of invasive plants, it increased the amount of clean water, and it actually reduces poverty and inequality. So this is I think it's a really good example of things that could work, especially if you look at all these things together. And it has been, there have been many international awards for this program. So it runs already, I think, for 30 years, 13 years. So it's a long one. Something like this is like a big dream to have here in Tanzania, right? In terms of restoring healthy rangelands, combating invasive species, which are all like, actually, solutions might be quite easy if you can have many hands, right? And that might be something that might, but that's for later. If you want to do something about that, you first need to know what is the community's opinion. Right? Maybe they like these invasive species. Many of them actually have a puntia montana to demarcate their house, right? So this is a guy, he's doing a PhD on invasive plants here in Grumeti, but also outside Grumeti. So he spent this summer with two Mweka students to look at what do the communities think? Do they recognize each of these species? What is their opinion? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do they want to get rid of it? For some species, it's quite obvious. For other species, it might not be. And that's the start of seeing, okay, how can we team up in combating invasive species? And you might even think about doing moving all the efforts you do inside the game reserve to can you do that maybe also outside, right? Long-term perspective. This is Freddie Ledini. He's a PhD student from Groningen University, which in Lodiongo, and they're trying to do experiments to see whether they can combat this Acacia griponlobium bush encroachment. So what they do is they have these areas where they do not graze for a certain time. Some of that they cut everything, the other half they do not cut it, and then they reintroduce that fire. That is the idea. If you can have a regular fire like every couple of years, you actually kill these seedlings and then you keep an open landscape. But that would require like a grazing rotation scheme, which is applied actually in some areas now. I think in the Tarangire system, they are experienced with that. There's also some experience in Kenya, and they seem to work quite well because if you actually let alone the grass for a year, it certainly starts to become more productive as well. So in the end, actually, the herders are better. But this is an ongoing project. I think actually the Human Fire team is there right now to burn it. Yeah, today. Yeah, exactly. And then a third one. So these are my students in Kajiado. So they work with Soralo, it's an NGO that basically unites all the Maasai communities from Masai Mara to Amboseli. They bring them together to like make decisions on how to manage these landscapes. And we had some students there that actually did interviews with their perceptions on prosopis, in this case, the invasive plant, and how that affects human-wildlife conflict. But the first things that come out of it is that all these Maasai now, they want to get rid of it as soon as possible, and they just say, that's what's happening. So we have experiments going on there as well to see how we can effectively remove it. But also there are so many seeds of this prosopis that it requires many hands. So like we're thinking about educational programs, that every kid or every herder like pull out all the seedlings. Because if you don't do that, then it's just you can remove whatever you want, but it goes back. So it's an integrated approach, maybe also biocontrol. We have a meeting next week in Moshi actually about biocontrol in Tanzania. Because people are very against it, both in Kenya and Tanzania in general. But yes, we fly in South Africa, and that's where the three countries meet to give their experiences, because they've been doing this for about 100 years now. It's also something we are talking about with Grimeti for the dam here, and we have now Speed Gulf, trying to restore that over the coming years. And that's the water ice thing. So we hope that we can do something there as well. Okay, so if we can remove those invasive plants, then that might help already be a first step, restoring healthy rangelands, basically, right? That increases visibility and should bring down conflict as well, right? So this is data from the MRT again. So the most of the elephant incidents happen like within 10 kilometers. So we need at least like 10-kilometer soft boundary to keep the animals in, and that they cannot cover it in one night. And you won't bring this to zero, but reducing it is every little reduction is a big result. And about 50% is maize, but I think I'm not sure whether this applies also to this area. This is the national data. The idea is that if you can restore those healthy landscapes, you might also mitigate these wildlife conflicts. Can we do something inside there? That's the other question, right? It's not just the people's problem. Like, this is your problem outside, and that's it. It's also something that the manager of the protected area should worry about. Okay, so first of all, so this is a study by Inge de Jonge, a postdoc of mine, who's actually moved to Amsterdam. Do you see it? So this is the boundary between Serengeti and Bolivia. This was before Kololeti Game Reserve was established. She had 3 plots inside the Serengeti, 3 plots inside the village lands. And these are below us. She looked at mammal abundances across this border. What she basically found, so used camera traps, is that in the wet season, so this is a response ratio. So basically 0 means that herbivores have no preference for village lands or protected area. If it goes everything above means they like the village lands more than a protected area. Everything negative means they like to stay, or they stay more often in the protected area. In the wet season, we find hardly any. There's only 2 species of giraffe and Brandt's gazelle that actually prefer the village lands of the Maasai. And that is, there's a lot of trees. So if you graze a lot, then all these individuals, they grow out to big trees. And so most of the animals you find outside are actually the big browsers, especially because they don't compete with any of the livestock. It's a really different niche. In the dry season, it becomes different. So then most of the species actually go inside. Only you find tungsten gazelles and giraffe again outside. So there is a lot of wildlife outside protected areas, especially on the eastern side of the ecosystem. And there's also a lot of plant diversity. So we did a study with Justina Kwango, who actually sees the Tanapa a scientist. She actually now is chief park warden of Lake Manyara. Just a couple of weeks ago, she took that position from Russia to Lake Manyara. She defended her PhD 2 weeks ago. So what we did there is we had 7 sites inside the protected, 9 sites inside the protected area and 9 sites outside protected area. We looked at plant diversity using what they call a modified linear plot. So we have these little half by 2 meter plots, blank ones, with 10 of them in each site. And we have 2 of these 2 by 5 meter sites, 1 5 by 20. Then you sample the whole area. That means you can look at plant diversity at 1 meter scale, 10 meter scale, 100 meter scale, and at 1,000 meter scale. Well, so generally, if you look at large scales, the diversity goes up, right? That's just a sampling. But what the unexpected thing, at least we were really surprised by this, is that the Serengeti National Park, that's no livestock, actually has much lower diversity than the Bolivarian. So about 1.5 to 2 times more plants. If you look at the 1 square meter, 10,000 doesn't matter. That's so we call it the species area relation intercept. So basically where it crosses the x-axis. So it's much higher outside of the slope, hardly different. It was not really different at these scales. And then overall, the diversity increased with rainfall in both areas, and there was no effect on slope. But then, if you look at what we call Jaccard dissimilarity, so it's a measure of how different is each plot to each other, right? So if you move from this 1 by 1 meter plot to the next one, do you find the same species, or do you find a completely different community? A 0 means it's exactly the same species composition, or 1 means it's very different, like completely different species composition. We find that inside the Serengeti, the diversity is larger between these plots, but inside. And there is no really effect on rainfall here. Then, but that's within sites. And then we can also look at across sites. So what if you move from one site to the next? What you see in Serengeti, that's the blue ones. If you move from one site to another, it's about 80% of the species are nearby, right? Across these 9 sites. And outside protected areas, it's much lower. You really need to cover a larger difference in the rainfall gradient to get to that complete species term. So alpha diversity, so within each plot, is much higher outside, but the beta diversity, the turnover, is much lower, right? And we think that is a biotic, what they call biotic homogenization. So livestock is decreasing plant-plant competition locally, get more species, but it's like homogenizing the whole environment. So where within the Serengeti you get different species with different rainfall, etc. Outside, livestock dominates the species composition. So it switches from bottom up to top down things. And that's kind of what you see here. It's kind of the S plot. So Serengeti is very distinct from each other, while plots in bottom are on top of each other, which basically means it's the same species composition. Okay, the cool thing now, and that's I think the most important message, is that overall we found 297 plant species, where 212 were found in both areas, or in each area, sorry, each. And that means that both Serengeti and Bolivarian had 85 unique plant species. So if you want the highest diversity in plants, you need national parks, but also areas with livestock, because they complement each other in terms of species composition, right? So what I think what should happen is to bring back this mosaic of protected area. Okay? So we not only need full protected area, we also need semi-protected area, and then none. So restore these soft boundaries. And we think that will also reduce human-wildlife conflict. We were in Wausau 2 days ago with the district game officer, and he said that since Bolivarian has been installed, the human-wildlife conflict has increased big time. So what happens is the lions, they moved into Bolivarian, we know that. There's many attacks now in Malambo, is that village called? Malambo. It's actually, so since that Bolivarian game was there, it seems like, so what they basically do is they move the boundary towards the village. And now the lion only have to cover like a very small distance, right? So you think, on one hand, yes, the wildlife is back. Yeah, this is a big conservation win. But then if you look at the other consequences, you might actually think it's the opposite. So it's a complex story. But I think thinking about how we manage the borders is really important. It's not just like, let's conserve as much as possible. Or not. Okay, so that is the overall story. Maybe my mission for the next 30 years to read more. It's complex, I know. Okay, so we need a multi-scaled approach, and I think that's boring because everyone says that all the time. But it is necessary. So at the national scale, we need a vision on what are our key biodiversity areas, EBAs, where are they, and how can we increase their reactive capacity and corridors. And the good thing is that Tanzania has made such a plan, right? So we have this report, which has all these basically protected areas now, or protected area complexes. They identify these corridors. There still has to be, that's work in progress, right? You can say a lot about this. But the good thing is that there is a vision, there is a plan, right? So let's start with that. But then you need, so vision is there, we need also boundary conditions. What can you do, what can you not do? There are major differences between, for instance, Tanzania and Kenya. In Kenya, you can own land. Here, you cannot, right? In South Africa, you can own wildlife. That's what they do there. They basically build these mega farms, put a lot of wildlife in. You see the amount of wildlife. There's a lot to say about that as well, but there's differences, and that are boundary conditions you can set as a government. Also by hunting, for instance, those things. And then resources, right? And that is, I think, not going so well at the moment. So there's not a lot of resources available to change these landscapes into healthy landscapes. At the regional landscape, so that's the region, but also district, we need to come up with land use management plans to restore these soil boundaries. And that is, people are working on it. So there's land use plans. It's work in progress. It's very difficult, of course, because everyone has a different opinion on these things. But it is very important, because if you just let things go, then it's just chaos. That's probably everyone will suffer. And then last is, I think, community-led restoration of healthy landscapes. So really put these communities in charge and see how you can facilitate that. I did talk to the FZS in Sierra Leone just a couple of days ago, and to the Serengeti district. And it seems that they are applying this framework now. So really see, okay, how can we make these communities act? Really curious to see what the results of that will be. But it's a bit like working for water, but then on a smaller scale. And then, of course, we need also local solutions. So you have these beekeeping, boma enforcement. There's all kinds of things that are evaluated. One of the things maybe we could say here is that boma enforcement, we've seen that. So in Kenya, what they use is these flashlight systems, which look pretty seem to work pretty well. So the line depredation in these flashlight bomas went down. We see the same thing here. So they have these living bomas now in the Serengeti district, these green walls basically. It looks like they're effective. But what we see in Kenya is that what lions do is, instead of going into these bomas at night, they now start attacking livestock during the daytime. And I think the first story I've heard, that's also happening here now. So what you do is you basically, these animals are clever, right? That's cool, but it's also the problem, right? And so it's like a cat and mouse game. You do this and then they do that. But the issue here is that many of these livestock are herded by like small kids, right? So basically you're now putting small kids, exposing them to lions by enforcing their boma, which is like it's an indirect, but a very, problematic indirect. Okay. And then, so what we really try to do from our group, but in Leiden in general, and it's now adopted in many places in the Netherlands, is what we call the triple I approach. And that is and that's actually, let me first explain what it is. Okay, so first we need the interdisciplinarity. So we don't just need to do ecology. Like I've seen this a lot during my training as an ecologist, all the way from my bachelor to my PhD. Like many ecologists, protected area. Their argument is people need to leave nature alone. We need to increase the protected areas to 50%, and that's it. Problem solved, right? I don't believe in that. So we need to work together with anthropologists, economists, governance scientists, to cover all these different aspects of sustainability to make good communities. We need to work intersectoral. So it's not just scientists. We need to work together with politicians, NGOs, companies, local people. It might sound very logical to you, but it's not. So in the Netherlands, we are very disciplinary, very science, leave us alone. And the last one is international. So we try to connect. So we try to connect South Africans, Kenyans, Tanzanians, and of course, Dutch people. I encourage to exchange knowledge. What the problems we are facing here, they're also facing that in South Africa and in Kenya. We can learn from each other, both what works, but also what doesn't. I think actually Tanzania, if you look at the Target conference, actually doing a great job here. There's different disciplines involved. Connection between NGOs and scientists and politicians really advanced, much better than what we do. And so we got a big program funded. It's called the GROW program. It's funded by the European Union. And we started, so we applied for 10 million euros of funding. Now, this month, actually, Montana is one of them. 51 PhD positions started in the Netherlands across 5 universities. And all of them, I think actually all 51, but at least 95% is African. So African scholars coming to do a PhD in the Netherlands about African culture. And it's all interdisciplinary. It's all about connecting different SDGs to each other. So Matana is working on human lion conflict. And so I presented this at Sevilla last year because then we didn't have someone yet. But now Matana has filled this position and we traveled around last week and made a great start with this project. But I'm really, this is such a cool project that we have all these PhDs together on these sustainability issues. Okay, so a summary, take-home thoughts. Biodiversity is the basis for sustainable development. Pretty convinced by that. Tanzania is doing incredibly well in terms of biodiversity conservation. I think much better than many other countries. The downside is then that you get human wildlife. You hardly get human wildlife. It's sometimes take a sheep, that's all. So human wildlife conflict is increasing. Crocodiles, it's an underestimated problem, I would say. Cooperating by elephant, of course. Key conservation opportunities lie in rural areas by enabling local communities to to tackle the problems that they face. We should all try to help them get there. Restoring healthy landscapes and reducing restoring from both sides, but also from the protected area side of things, trying to restore these soft boundaries. That is a major something I would really like to talk about with you. How do you do this? And can we actually, for instance, one of the things that you could think of, that we talked about over the past days, is it looks like Maswa, for instance. There's much less conflict with lions in that area than here in Serengeti, in the Serengeti. We know that there's a lot of much more hunting going on. Could hunting be like a way to reduce wildlife on the edges of the protected areas, to reduce wildlife? Those kind of ideas, like I really want to see how people think of it. Increasing biodiversity, also reducing more wildlife conflict. Triple I approach, 3 skills. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Hi, thank you very much for such a very informative presentation. So for those who are online, you can either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can type in your question. And then those who are in person, you have an advantage of this. Raise your hand and, ask the question. Or you can just have a comment.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was great. What are your thoughts on, coupling? Obviously, restoring soft boundaries is a good objective. But when one thinks about the population increases, certainly in Tanzania, projections are that it's going to reach something like 300 million by, I think it's 2100. That food security is obviously also a major factor. That restoration of ecological integrity, there should be also just as much efforts to improve agricultural sector, generating growth. Now, just your thoughts on that, and how does Tanzania sort of scale that up, because it's very much dependent on scale farming, which homestead is reliant on their land, for example. Just curious, when one looks ahead to the future, what does that look like for?
That's a question, man. Yeah, okay, so I should say it's not my expertise. I'm not going to say anything about this. I don't know anything about the not a lot about food security. So we have an Africa Study Center in Leiden. So unites about 100 scientists from different disciplines that work at the entire continent, from development economics, anthropology, area studies, and then the Emily colleagues basically come in. So we have these kind of conversations, and the rising population is a major driver. The solution, so to say, for that would be urbanization. So as long as you can make it work, that people do not move like to the rural area in the opposite direction. And that is actually something you see in Europe a lot. So people are actually leaving the rural areas and they're moving towards the cities. That's where the work is. So now left alone, you get all the wild. In the Netherlands, but also in the US, most people live in cities. I don't know how you do it, but I think that is the only way. Like you have to concentrate people in a smaller place. Because if you don't do it, then this will be a different story. Food security. So we're working on it. Actually, we have a paper in progress. Although I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it because it's not my expertise. What people have been focused on in terms of food security is mostly production, so yield, right? So how much food do you produce? And if I may believe what's being said is that worldwide, definitely, there's more food being produced than we need, but also in Tanzania, there's more food being produced than that's actually being used. The main problem is access. So not everyone has access to the food. A lot of the things are actually exported to other countries. So we try to make that whole food security, and that's not just us, there's a lot of people that say it, but it's try to make it more diverse. So not just looking at what is being produced, but what is access, how stable is food production. So there's now 4 or 6, depending on which framework you look, dimensions of food security. And I think we would look more into other dimensions, like how can we make sure that everyone gets access to it instead of can we produce more food, and I know those are related to each other, then it might be a different story. I'm not sure about the figures, anyone knows this, but I think in Tanzania it's a bigger problem than the type of food, than the diversity of meals is a bigger issue than actually the amount of food across the country. Because many people don't eat have a diverse enough diet, so they get problems with their health because they only eat 1 or 2 things. And then actually smallholder farms are really good because many of the things that smallholder farms produce is directly being accessed by the communities next to it. Or if you scale it up to these large farms, what happens is mostly it goes to a different place, like either to a different place in Tanzania or being exported to other parts of the world. So I think I don't know, I'm not an expert on it, but I think that is the way to look at it when you want to.
All right. So Laxi Agarwal says very insightful and some great work. Good to hear about all the students and effort being made. Quick question regarding quantitative data collection, international students and translation of data during collection and analysis by non-Swahili speakers, whether they pass this, and then how does the organization manage the cost clearance for the number of students, and do the funds cover the cost? I think these are more of like logistics, but I think I'll just allow you to just answer quickly, but definitely these are kind of information that we can provide off the platform.
Well, I can quickly respond.
Yeah.
So what we do here in Tanzania with Example, we just Mweka students. So that basically solves a lot of these issues, right? So it's local, they all speak Swahili. The permits are actually much easier. Well, Example did all of this, so I can say that. And then we can cover the costs. So that in Kenya, it was different because we did fly in 3 Dutch students. Actually, one was French, one was German, but from Leiden University. What we did is we provided money to let them hire an intern, a Kenyan intern for a full year. So that person could get, so that's Sadala, he could get the experience, and then he could help our students. So he was like the translator. That is the, I don't know, without that help, you can never do these companies. Thank you.
I have a question. Just with regards to like restoring your soft boundary, and you mentioned mosaic. Like what does that kind of look like, and how is that controlled?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, so what we generally call is like buffer zones. That's the general thing that comes up in many countries. We're actually doing that in the Netherlands now as well, following the Tanzanian design. But it's like making sure that the areas where people can do whatever they want, the areas that are like fully protected nature reserves, there is something in between where there are restrictions. That can take many shapes, right? So you can have areas where there's livestock grazing. There can be areas with intense livestock grazing, less intense livestock grazing. You can organize that in different ways. So you can say, okay, we make a border somewhere, people can walk in from that side, and then you will automatically get a gradient in livestock intensity because they have to walk in. So the areas closer to the boundary are heavily grazed, and then the further you move in, it gets less grazed, right? So that's how you create a gradient. It can also be areas where people cannot live for graze, but they can hunt or they can fetch wood, right? So there's different options. I think many of those options are already here. WMAs are in more and more, of course. The issue, I think, is really like who's responsible, who's setting the boundary conditions, and that's a big question. How you?
Would you like? I don't know if it's ever been where you kind of put in like intermittent fencing. So you have like a fence and then another fence where, as you say, it's only accessible from like a certain point.
So you get like a
yeah.
Could be an option too. I don't have experience with that, but that could be an option. Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that conversation is that I think, in Tanzania, there's good models and they're applied in many of the villages. They've applied, certain types of land designation where the other urban areas, areas. And those are essentially multi-use buffer zones. The problem comes in because of poor governance and commission. And over time, what we've experienced here, this like a busy grazing area, is that when we first got here, it was the grazing resource and biomass for livestock was far greater, much higher, and that was all local cattle back in 2003. So what they had then compared to what they have now is far less, and poor governance, no doubt, being a primary driver of that. But also what's been happening is when you look at the livestock numbers that have increased, pressures on these open areas of grazing resources around the country, in particular the lakes that have been depleted. We're getting cattle moving up from the lakes to these areas. I'll go to the village council chairman and say, there's $1 million shillings, here's an army, taken by 1,000 cattle and graze them. And over time, you've just seen a complete ecological downgrade, basically, where these areas which were once productive and good for both livestock and wildlife are now not good for anyone. And that's why there's huge efforts here now to restore integrity, to provide those incentives and benefits for communities, because it's a good model, but without good leadership and good governance.
So if you create like soft boundaries again, you're kind of cutting maybe into the protected area. You don't want to push people back.
Yeah, so I mean, there's on this boundary of ours, for example, there's two open areas. There's one out to the west, it's up here, and historically well, but we don't want to be the private sector. Certainly doesn't want to be the policeman when it comes to governing that. That ownership must sit with the communities. And I think they realise now that this has drastic consequences by allowing other foreign capital to come in. They need to push them on, store the land, get them to go back to where they come from, and they don't manage their land in their community. So over the last 15 years, I've been noticed huge changes in the increasing population doesn't help. Pressures grow, everything it's more complicated, going from 68 million now to 300 million by 2100. Yeah, it's leadership and governance and providing good opportunities is what I like to restore.
Correct. There's another question from Julius Mbaga. Says, how do you think future generations will view our current approach to coexistence? And what changes might they expect from us?
It's philosophical. True. I don't know. It's difficult. I know. So what is interesting, I think, is to see how young Tanzanian people start to think differently than the older generations. And you see that in many places. So in Loliondo NCA, many of the young people are less happy with the whole livestock system, let's say it like that. So the problem with livestock keeping in Tanzania is not so much it's just food security, right? It's much like a status symbol. The more cattle you have, the more lives you have, the more everything you have, right? And that is a cultural thing. That's nothing to do with poverty or security, I would say, or nothing, but at least not just food security. And if that can change, and I see that happening now, talk to younger Maasai people, say, like, we have to change this, it's not going to work. And it's the same thing with climate change in the Netherlands as well. All the old people say, like, whatever, just wait for 10 years and it's fine, right? But the young people are really worried about it. They want to do things differently. I do see that happening here as well. You talk to different generations. The Abalia, speak go. Young people are really happy that they get compensation coming out. Old people generally are less happy, honestly. That's because young people see that the crocodile attacks, like some of the sub-villages are now being inundated. Lake Victoria is the lake level is rising. But I think there is a big generational shift, and I hope that will do a lot of good in that sense. But yeah, that's the same in every country. I see that. Old farmers really they do whatever they did. Young farmers, they change their farming practices because they think sustainability is important because they want to have a company for the next 30 years.
All right.
And I hope they're happy with it.
Yeah.
If this is being recorded, I hope they would say, Phil, thank you.
All right. We have more questions from people online. Another question from Lakshmi. Are there any assumption about the behavior change or impact on the animal should certain invasive and troublesome plant species be removed in terms of their survival and hunting approaches? That's number one. Should I ask another one?
Behavior of animals?
Yeah, just behavior of people, I think. Behavior of people towards alien species, whether they have some kind of cultural attachment.
Like indigenous.
Yeah. And the animals as well.
Can you repeat that?
Are there any assumptions about behavior change or impact on the animals? Certain basic.
Well, but I have assumptions. Well, I try to shortcut those assumptions by like asking them like what they think about them, right? But I do have all kinds of assumptions about it. Yeah. But we really like to have the input from the villages. Like, what do you want with these invasive species? Do you want to keep them? Do you want to get rid of them? If they're latter, how can we help you? I think that's the approach. That is what you need to do. Like, it's not that it doesn't help to go in there and say okay.
Yeah, and then there's another question from Ambrose. What factors apart from fetching water from the rivers contribute to human fatalities like crocodiles? The government agencies, conservation societies undertake efforts to reduce human killing by crocodile.
Yeah. So it's not just fetching water; it's also cleaning, and it's washing. They do a lot of things, and it's fishing, of course. So a lot of fishermen. They're pilots now with they call it fenced areas. So they part of the shore, they put like an aquatic fence basically to keep out crocodiles, so people can enter more safely. I don't know what the results of those are. They are being tested now. I think actually they're pretty promising. compared to the elephant problem here, I think the crocodile problem is way easier to solve.
Mm.
If you have
Yes.
the right things in place.
Cool. One more question. Sorry. Just I'll ask this one. It'll be like
I'll be around for that.
it'll be the last one for the online one. Okay. This is from Dr. Mayengo. I think the lecturer from Mweka. What do you think are the challenges of engaging local community in conservation?
Yeah, I've been quite surprised by the positive attitude of many communities towards biodiversity and wildlife. I think if you present these numbers that I just presented, which are very highly underestimated, it's actually happening. If I would present it in the Netherlands, like if one person would get attacked by a wolf now, like the whole country will explode, right? So there is a relatively acceptance and positivity. But back to Maasai, they're like, I tell them, why don't we shoot the elephants or the lions, right? Get rid of the problem. They say, no, it's part of our life, right? So I think many of them actually do or do appreciate conservation and are willing to help there. I think the most important thing is how do you get people to work together on a plan that everyone wants to contribute to. It's a governance thing. I think that is the most important issue. Maybe there's different opinions here, but I think that is the how do you get everyone to go for the same plan.
Thank you, Michael, for the insightful presentation. I think mine is related to the last point there about the intersectoral or the interdisciplinary approach, of course, combined with all the other three scales approach. I think more interested in the intersectoral interdisciplinary approach to bringing the key sectors in this whole landscape health issue. And I'm thinking agricultural sector, the agriculture as in crop farming, but also livestock, then the water sector, and of course, wildlife or natural resources management. In your efforts and that engagement in Tanzania and Kenya, maybe South Africa, your 51 PhDs, what efforts is there so that to create a platform or to ensure there is more co-working between these sectors beyond the 3, 4, 5 year period of this PhD project? Is there something that is being created or built along to ensure that this continues? Because I remember being also in one of the Tawiri conferences a few years back, where there was a really struggle and a question about how to communicate science and how to make sure that all the important sectors are in the room, but not only in the room, but it continues after that. Is there something being thought of or being created along?
Yes and no. So the PhD project is 4 years. And after that, Matana is free to do whatever he wants, right? He's not bound to us for the rest of his life. But we do make career plans. So we do say, okay, where do you want to be in 4 years from now? What do you want to accomplish and how can we help you with that? So that is part of every of these 51 PhDs. All of them are supervised by 2 different institutes, so disciplines basically, to ensure that the academic supervision is interdisciplinary. Then we have an academic advice, or no, not an academic, an advisory board, which has to have someone from outside academia. So for Matana, that would be, for instance, Bana Kisui or Dennis Ikanda, so people that don't work for academic institutes but are lion experts in the country. And we need an academic partner from Africa to have this international aspect. So we asked Daniel Parker, professor in South Africa, to be part of this advisory board as well. So we have an academic interdisciplinary supervision team. We have an advisory board that is non-academics and African academics. Altogether, we hope that will pull it off, right? We have been traveling now around 3 DGOs, and the plan is that he will continue doing this for the rest of the other, 6 districts around the Serengeti ecosystem. to really get this connection to what happens at the district level or the village level. And that's pretty scary. So Matana has been studying giraffes for his master's, right? And now he runs the Lion Project. So he's really an ecologist. That's what I was as well. And it's really scary to then go do something else, like suddenly talk to people and like these kind of things. But you said it was eye-opening this week to what is going on and how this will help his PhD. And I think in the end, 3 out of his 4 PhD chapters will be social science chapters, like interviews, one of the data and those kind of things. And only one of them will be ecological. That is because like Emily and I are really going into that direction. So we take him along there. But I do think we need to take all the steps. But if you have any advice on how to make this longer term, then I would really hear what you have to say. We try to, like this is 51, this is the start. But the whole idea is a Grow Academy. So we keep on going for like the next 10, 15 years. But yeah, the next all that money has to come in to support the next group of PhD students. That's always like an issue. But we actually be here next week when we get a big grant, and if that happens, then we have another 20. So yeah, it's ongoing work.
Yeah, maybe you can talk offline about.
Yeah, sure.
Question from Mark.
Just picking up on I think I heard you correct. Small thing that you raised earlier, but an important thing I'd just like to understand from the GF team. Yeah, you mentioned, Kenya using lights for lions and then transitioning from night attacks to day attacks. And I think you said that locally a lion's taken up residence in the enhanced cover, which has been precipitated by overgrazing. Just asking your team, Noel and George, if you went to the community and said your actions by overgrazing are enabling more human-wildlife conflict because lions are now taking refuge in an area that's only got cover as a result of your activities, there's a circle of events there. How would they react? Because there is this inescapable culture of more is more, not less. How would the communities who graze in that areas actually react to that fact that lions are not only there more permanently because what they've created?
Like 100% sure, but what I can say is because there have been an effort before, actually twice some years back, like 2018, 2019, to intervene. We provided the rationale, and they did accept. And more recently this year, last year and this year. But the stumbling block to mass frontier is, okay, we get it, we want the intervention to happen. There will be some conditions like the protection of grazing and other restrictions that will have to be put there, which will stop the business as usual in terms of grazing and access to the area. There will still be room for access, but differently. So that all, when we tried, was okay. The stumbling block came to so who polices or who ensures that everyone plays by these rules that we are setting up for the future benefit. That's where I think kind of fell apart because they feel like they won't be able to do it among themselves because of many considerations, social. Of course, for us, that being a community land, I think there's a point beyond which we would want to go. Also, it won't be appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. That's a very good point.
So we were almost there, except for some of those challenges, which we're still thinking about, but so far no silver kind of bullet.
Just like seems as it provides whether it's scalable, but a good example of attending to number 4 that by getting that behavioral change, by providing an example that's been caused directly by grazing.
No, I think the experience of running Lodi Hondo is a nice example. The communities really support them. But even if they would not show that bringing fire back into the system is going to reduce the bush encroachment problem, and still it's like, how do you upscale that? Like, from those little plots to the landscape, that requires a huge effort from the community side. FZS is planning something like this as well. The Serengeti district, like clearing areas. We were like yesterday, and I asked them that question. So what if you've cleared it? But then, because if you don't do anything, like 5 years from now, it will be the same one. They didn't really have an answer. So you really need to have the communities. But actually, you want the communities to make the plan. And once they have done it, you can see how can we facilitate it. But you don't want to take ownership there about the situation. It's really.
I think that's a huge challenge. It's like, what's the incentive to maintain that land? You know, that's part of the problem. They can turn back into a community grazing area after 10 years of restoration, back to square one. Spent thousands of dollars, and just not sustainable.
All right. So we just want to say thank you to all our online participants, and to also thanks our speaker. We'll just close this and then we'll continue our conversation, especially for those who are on site. So we can just like give hands of applause to Dr. Thank you so much. And for those who have signed in for more seminar series, I have taken your emails and be in touch. Thank you. So end like that, and then we continue for this one.